Good morning, friends. I'm Chris Vaneman, Dean of the School of the Arts at Converse University, and joining me today is conductor Lee Mills. Lee is conducting the Spartanburg Philharmonic Saturday, March 25th at 7 o'clock in Twitchell Auditorium. He is a music director finalist for the Spartanburg Phil, and he's got a really cool program prepared for us this weekend. So, Lee, welcome to Spartanburg. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you get into music? What was your kind of story as a kid?
My origin story?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I actually started pretty young. My parents, I grew up in Belgrade, Montana, which is a very small town close to Bozeman.
Okay.
Kind of a similar situation here with Spartanburg and Greenville.
Okay.
You know, but much smaller than Spartanburg, like 6,000 people.
Okay.
And my parents had an auto mechanic shop. My dad was a mechanic. My mom did the books, and they had a friend of theirs who I think they helped move out of their house or something like that. And the friend, as a thank you, gave them this piano. I don't know if it was as a thank you or if it was because I don't want to deal with this anymore.
Right. Okay.
But so when I was
piano materialized in your house.
Right, when I was 3 years old, the piano materialized in our living room, and I started just pushing the buttons and seeing what was happening. And then I started asking my parents to give me piano lessons. And after probably the better part of a year, they relented, and I started taking piano lessons when I was 4. And I just loved, I loved the lessons and learning, but really what I loved to do, I would take it apart. I would take the bottom panel off and lie under the piano and push the keys up from the bottom and play everything from inside the piano instead of from the keyboard. It was just really this sort of fun.
Which I suppose is kind of the piano equivalent of if your parents, if your dad was a mechanic and he was under the car.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. So I've always had this sort of playful attitude about music. Just I love it very much, and I went accumulating various instruments as I grew up. I started playing trumpet, I played French horn, I sang, and this kind of I carried along with me until I went to college. And I went to Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, which is a very small liberal arts college. I got a scholarship to be a music major, so I was like, sure, why not? I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do at that point. And
a high school friend of mine, by the way, is dean of students at Whitman College. So I know if you're out there. Anyway, go on. Sorry. Yeah.
So sophomore year, second year of college, all of the music majors have to take a conducting class. Just a basic. Everybody's at some point.
Now, had you entered as a brass major, music ed, as piano? What was your kind of specialty going in?
So I started as a trumpet and a voice major. At that point, I had been playing piano for 15 or more years, and I was I wouldn't say I was tired of it, but I didn't feel inspired to practice for 8 hours a day anymore. I wanted to try, other things. I played trumpet, and I was studying voice, and I was trying to be a physics major at the same time because, growing up in rural Montana, I didn't have a lot of role models of people that were professional musicians as a day job. That wasn't something that I was aware of, really. So I thought I'd be a physics major and maybe get a real day job, get a real job.
Right, yeah.
And that all ended because sophomore year of college, I had an 8 a.m. physics class. And that's a very early time to go to class when you're a college kid. And I ended up getting a D+, which just kind of ended that idea of majoring in physics. So then it was just music. And in the conducting course that we had to take, I just absolutely fell in love with the whole idea of conducting, but mostly with the scores. Just studying scores became something I would do. I would wake up on Saturday morning, roll out of bed. Let me go look at this Beethoven symphony. And then all of a sudden it would be 6 p.m. and I hadn't had breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or brushed my teeth or anything. I had just been at 10 hours sitting at my desk looking at this Beethoven score. So it just kind of started rolling from there. I put together an orchestra with my peers starting my third year of college, so my junior and senior year of college. I had my own orchestra. We met every week. We rehearsed. We gave concerts. We played on my friend's piano recital. He was a piano major, wanted to do the Liszt concerto, so instead of doing it with two pianos, he did it with an orchestra. And then I went to Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore to actually do a graduate degree in conducting. And after that, I was the conducting fellow with the Baltimore Symphony in Marin Alsop.
Yeah, who is well known as a music educator.
Yes, she is
as a trainer in
really
addition
fantastic,
to,
fantastic teacher. And she taught at the time at Peabody with the late Gustav Meyer, who was also just a phenomenal pedagogue. And then after that, I actually worked at a university, at Towson University, conducting the orchestras and teaching conducting. And then I got my first just full-time professional conducting gig in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as the resident conductor of the Brazilian Symphony Orchestra.
Okay. So the fact that you were then moving to Rio as a young man, I presume, is a feature more so than a bug, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I loved Rio. It was such a new experience for me, both just in terms of the culture, of the city and of Brazil, but also in terms of exposure to repertoire that we don't get exposed to often here in the United States. I feel like there's a select number of pieces that have entered into the popular canon among orchestras in the United States, and they kind of tend to be repeated, every few years. But Villa-Lobos, for example, is a Brazilian composer that I learned about in school, but I didn't actually know very much of his music. Everybody knows Bachiano's Brasileiras number 5, the very famous one with the cellos and the soprano.
And the cellos, right.
And so just because it's number 5, you can assume there's 1 through 4, but there's actually 9, and they're all wildly different. One is for just a flute and a bassoon, and another one is for it's basically a piano concerto. Bachiano's number 3 is like a piano concerto, and 7 and 8 are symphonies. They're 4-movement symphonic works. Just the biggest range. And then he has also the choros and symphonies that he wrote himself, operas. So, and that's just one composer. And Brazil has a history of hundreds and hundreds of really excellent composers. And that's just Brazil. And then you start looking around Latin America and you find all of this, rich collection of repertoire that we just don't hear that often here in the United States. So I thought that was really inspiring for me. It was great for me to sort of get out of our little bubble here and go live in another country and see things through that lens. It was really fantastic.
Now, do you still do conducting work in Brazil, or have you moved back entirely to the States and you're busy in the States now?
For now, I'm pretty busy in the United States. I do have a concert that I'm going back to Brazil for in July, probably. Still to be confirmed, but it looks like it's going to happen. So I like to maintain that connection.
And where is home base for you now?
Right now I live in Santa Barbara, California.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, it's supposed to be nice, but it's only raining all the time. I want my money back.
So tell us about this program. This is a program that that doesn't feature Latin American music, but it does feature a lot of new music that might not be familiar to some of our audiences.
Yeah.
So could you talk about how this program came together, what we should be expecting to encounter as we're listening to this program?
Sure. Yeah. So the genesis of this, the hardest part logistically in putting a program together is finding the soloist and making sure they're available and knowing what piece they want to play. I have a very good friend, Conrad Tao, who's coming to play piano for us. And when I was talking with him about what he wanted to play, he offered, the usual Mozart concertos and some other things. But I generally like to try to have, equal parts new experience on the program as we do known, existing experiences. So since I knew we wanted to do a big symphony that would be standard repertoire on the second part of the program, I was really looking for something new. And this is a piano concerto that Conrad himself wrote. He composed this in 2015 on a commission. And it's really just a very incredible piece of music, a I would say it's unlike probably anything anybody's ever heard that's going to be coming. And that I don't mean to say that people haven't heard very many things. I mean that to say how unique this piece is. You know, even if you've listened to tons of music, it's just this really. It's a beautiful piece that finds a wonderful balance between incorporating electronic sounds and acoustic sounds. So Conrad actually, in addition to playing the piano and writing the piece, is also manipulating a computer that has certain tracks on it and electronic sounds that you might encounter in a club. But
so he's doing that in real time while he's also playing the concerto, or has that been prepared?
I mean, there's
somebody in the percussion section is doing it.
No, nobody in the percussion section is doing it, but they are sort of tracks that are pre-set up, so he just has to start them.
Okay.
Like he wrote them on his computer and created the track on his computer, and he starts it and then plays.
So he's got the keyboard in front of him, and then
the
computer
will be
keyboard
there
over to his left.
Exactly.
All right. Like Stevie Wonder or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
And it's just so wonderful because a lot of times you get these pieces of music that are it's a delicate process to incorporate electronics with acoustics because it's very easy for the electronics to overwhelm the orchestra or to become the focal point. But he just so delicately uses them. They only show up in the last two movements of the four movements that we play, and in the third movement they're just very sparse, encounters, and then finally become more prominent in the last movement. The last movement, he said, was inspired a lot by the sound of being in a club when a DJ's mixing two different tracks over each other, and you get these rhythms that sometimes, even though they're playing in the right tempo, just because the drummer was playing differently or the beat is different, you get these very complex rhythms where the two beats are intersecting each other. And it's just, I think it's just very, very masterfully done. That mixture of electronics with orchestra is so difficult to do, and he did such a great job. And so from that point, I was thinking it's got this really rhythmic drive to it. It would be interesting to sort of explore what are these sort of tools, these pillars that composers use when they compose music. And from that, I started looking for a piece of music that was not rhythmic at all, and instead was just very harmonically focused. And that brought me to thinking of the Arvo Pärt. And it actually came across my mind. I had heard it earlier. It's a very famous piece of music, but right around the time we were doing this program, coming up with this program, we went to go see a ballet at Pacific Northwest Ballet, and they had actually done a ballet to this piece, and it clicked in my head. I was like, that's the piece I have to open with. And it's just this really simple idea. The orchestra just plays an A minor scale, descending, but the trick is that they all play it at different speeds. So you get this scale that starts slipping out of place with itself, and because of that, you find all these wonderful harmonies where those notes clash and where they combine, where you complement each other, where they're dissonant with each other. And it's sort of like this kaleidoscope just kind of scaling through. And the way you hear it as a listener, there's no discernible like melody that you're going to walk out singing, and you're not going to be tapping your feet to the rhythm or anything, but it's just this wash of sound that's folding in and out on itself. So then we have the harmony, and we have the rhythm in Conrad Tau's piece, and then that brings us to Tchaikovsky, which is just like, he's probably one of the greatest writers of melody that the world has ever known. Some of the most beautiful melodies, especially if you think the second movement of the symphony, with that beautiful horn solo. Da, 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 It's just really long, beautiful melodies. So with those three elements, rhythm, harmony, and melody, really getting exposed to the wide variety of music that composers make.
And typically when we encounter these things, we find them more or less all sort of mushed together. And it's really interesting to have a program where each piece is motivated in a different sort of way, where you clearly have one where the central driving force is rhythmic, the central driving force is harmonic, and the central driving force is melodic. So listeners will then be able to kind of see what that experience is like as they're comparing those different types of compositional approaches.
Exactly.
I guess.
Yeah, and the other thing I realized only later was not an intention when I started making this program, but I think looking back on it, I could have picked any number of pieces to show harmony and melody to go with Conrad's concerto, but looking back on it, I think I was drawn to these particular pieces subconsciously because I realized after speaking more with Conrad about his piece, he actually wrote this piece in what was a very sort of emotionally distressful time for him. He was in a bit of a depression, really. And so this piece was a catharsis for him to sort of process that and get through that period of his life. And you'll hear that in the movements. The first movement is sort of like that numbness, that feeling of like despair, and it evolves through, by the time we get to the third movement, he has this great moment of release that you'll hear in the music that's just like pure catharsis, like just open, feeling relieved all of a sudden. And then the fourth movement is just this very exciting, triumphant, like we're off, looking forward to the future. And Arvo Pärt's piece, also draws on this. It's called Cantus in Memoriam of Benjamin Britten because Arvo Pärt was like a huge fan of Benjamin Britten's, never got to meet him, always wanted to meet him, really admired him as a composer, probably his favorite composer, I would say. And so when he died, Arvo Pärt was devastated. He never could meet his idol, and so he wrote this piece as a way to process that grief.
Right.
And Tchaikovsky, this Fifth Symphony was, he just married a student of his, and it was like a horrible marriage that he immediately regretted. He tried to throw himself in the Moscow River in late October, like certainly trying to kill himself. Fortunately, people saw and rescued him. But that led to even more distress in his life because he was given leave of absence from his role at the conservatory, sort of publicly shamed. And also, Fifth Symphony comes just months after that. And you can hear Tchaikovsky processing all of these emotions through that. And he also comes to the same sort of conclusion that Conrad does in his piece. This is a huge triumphant finale. So it's kind of this beautiful way that music helps us to process really complicated and difficult emotions and actually find a way through them onto a more optimistic or pleasant, state of mind.
Yeah, right, which is as important a job as music can hope for.
Yeah.
I think, to enable people to make it through those kinds of moments.
Yeah.
And with that Arvo Pärt piece, to be clear, he was living behind the Iron Curtain at that point. He was in Estonia when Estonia was part of the Soviet Union, which meant that the reason that he hadn't been able to meet Britten for all of those years of admiring him was that he couldn't get out of the country.
Right.
And so it was kind of a sense of mourning, I think, for both, his admired, favorite composer, but also for the possibilities that had been foreclosed him up until that point. And so you have this sense of mourning coming out of that piece. And I know my experience as a listener, I'm a flutist myself, so I've never played that piece, never been involved in performing it. But as a listener, it almost feels random what's happening on stage, but it's very much not. It is very tightly organized as to who's entering when, exactly the speed they're playing their descending minor scale at. And all of that stuff is really tightly worked out.
It's like surprisingly mathematical. Yeah. Pärt was a huge fan of liturgical music.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of based on early church music. It's in the Aeolian mode, which for those of you who want to know what that is, just go to a piano. If you can find the A, just play all of the notes going down from one A to the other, and don't play any black keys. So that's the Aeolian mode, and it's a church mode. It was used in chants, and then he also used this technique from church music, which is this writing in canon. So it's going to sound totally random, but it's not. The violins come in and they play a very specific line of music with a very specific rhythm. And then the second violins come in a little bit later and they do the exact same thing the first violins do. It's just that everything's twice as long. So instead of holding a count for one beat, they hold it for two beats, etc. And then the violas come in, and it's twice as long as the seconds. And so it's quite interesting because you get the basses. By the time the double bass comes in, they have to hold notes for like 16 measures before they can move on to the next one. But it is exactly the same line that the first violins play from the very beginning. And then because of this sort of dispersion of the rhythmic value of the notes, you get all of this evolution that you never get the same combination twice. You know, everything's moving constantly, and because they're on different speeds, you never have something that bumps into itself again.
And it sounds very abstract and intellectual when we describe it, but the experience as a listener is actually weirdly emotional.
Yeah.
It is very much a piece that you can react to just straight from your heart without having to kind of, perform any mental calculations.
No, it's surprisingly natural. You know, you just sit there and you can feel, the grief in it for something that's so mathematically calculated. It's so surprising that it just feels so humanly natural, so emotionally easily available, for us to perceive the emotional content of it.
Yeah.
It's really quite remarkable.
And certainly that Tchaikovsky symphony is another one where the emotional content is something that the listener will be able to perceive really easily, right?
Yeah, well, and the Tchaikovsky and also Conrad's piece, I talked about
in a very different way, but it sounds like.
And I hope, I talked about, it's bringing electronic elements in the orchestra. It doesn't have that much melody. It's very rhythmically focused. And I don't want
people are going, uh-oh.
Yeah, I do not be scared of it, because it is just like the Parrot or the Tchaikovsky. Conrad's writing is just so organic and so natural. It's 100% accessible now to anybody. You don't have to understand music. Like, it will just fill you with the emotions that he was feeling. I remember studying it, and the reason that I had this conversation about the inspiration for all of the movements and everything through that piece was because I was studying it, and I was like, I could feel, these memories of very similar times to what Conrad ended up describing to me, just times of grief or times of depression and dealing with these states of emotion. And so I called him and I was like, Conrad, tell me about the first movement, because I feel like it's about this. He's like, oh yeah, it is about this. He didn't have to tell me that at first. It's just so immediately clear.
But it means that the composer has done his job,
exactly,
doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's very effective. So don't be afraid of the fact that it doesn't have much of a melody. It's definitely, it's a good one.
So in all cases, as a listener, what I want to be doing is kind of just allowing myself to experience those emotions.
Yes.
Right, and and I'm getting emotions that are being conveyed in different approaches for each of the different composers. But it sounds like the ultimate experience and the ultimate aim is pretty much the same for all pieces, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I think about for all music. And you're the dean of a music school, so if I understand if you might want to cover your ears, but I try to tell people, don't try to be too academic about it, or don't try to think too much about it. Obviously, as musicians, as technicians and craftsmen in our trade, we need to understand theory, and we need to understand form analysis and all these things to be able to make the music that we do. But as a listener, I think the best thing that anybody can do is just come in with a complete blank slate, ready to absorb what's coming at you. Sometimes I fall in the trap, having been trained in classical music and knowing form and all of the theory and all this. I fall in the trap sometimes of going to hear a new piece of music and entering with an expectation of what I want to hear. I'm going to want to hear this kind of melody, and then the harmony should move like this, and then we have the B section, and then we go into the development, and then if you go in with an expectation, you're kind of setting yourself up to either be kind of disappointed or at least not be wonderfully surprised. Yeah. So just I always tell audience members, the best thing you can do is just walk in and just be open, just be open to experience whatever you feel. Yeah. And the good news is that you're in a dark concert hall, so if you start crying, nobody's going to be watching you.
Right. So tell us a little bit about the process for you as a conductor of getting a score like the Conrad Tao one, which is it's obviously it's a big score. You're looking at it, and it doesn't necessarily give you clues as to this moment is about such and such emotion or whatever. What's the learning process like for you? Are you sitting at the piano working your way through these things? Are you sitting in a coffee shop looking at things and circling stuff with your pencil?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of all of the above, I would say. For a new piece like Conrad's, fortunately, this time we have a recording of it because he premiered it in 2015, and there's an archival recording of that, which facilitated greatly. But it's not always there, especially in new music. So
Right.
a lot of times, I have to sit down myself and play through things. Sometimes I can read through it without using a piano and kind of be able to hear what's on the page. But especially with contemporary music, that sometimes you get these uncommon harmonies and uncommon orchestrations or instrumentations that I'm not used to. It's harder for me to just see that and hear what it sounds like in my head.
Yeah.
So I'll play through things at the piano, and I generally go through and divide. I just got done telling everybody to stop trying to listen for form or anything like that, but I usually go through to try to find sort of the markers that I can identify the segments of the piece, what are the primary places to hit. And then I can break those down even farther and find out what are the smaller phrases within this. And I kind of I identify those points, and I use that information to sort of help me shape the arc of the piece, because we're not computers. We don't just go in and play all of the notes exactly the same. You've got to build up to something, and you have to come back sometimes. And, so a lot of my study time is spent deciding what is the form, what is the structure, the direction of the piece, where is it going.
So in a way, you then, as the conductor, as the performer, are doing the thinking for us as audience members.
Right.
You have to understand this in order to make it really effective, so that we can just sit back and have the emotional experience.
You, as a listener, don't have to understand any of that.
Right.
You just have to sit there and enjoy it.
But if you as the conductor don't, then the whole thing is going to just be a meaningless jumble.
Right. I mean, and that's a big difference. You can hear Tchaikovsky 5. I mean, it would be hard to screw that one up, but you can definitely hear it, and maybe it won't be bad, but you'll be like, oh, that was nice, or you can hear it and you'll be like, and all of that has to do with pacing, how we structure the volume of the piece, the tempos that we choose, where the momentum is going forward, where it's coming back. It's all about creating this sort of emotional ride. And when it's done successfully, which we need to know the structure of the piece to be able to pace it correctly. Yeah. That's when you leave the concert hall being like, I don't know what it was about that, but I feel like a different person coming out of here. And people tell that to me all the time. It's people who have nothing to do with music can tell but the difference between a beautiful performance and an okay performance. You don't have to know anything about music to be able to tell. Yeah, it's clear.
If the people on stage have really done their homework and done their jobs.
Yeah, so that's what I do. I put the structure of it in. I try to figure out the momentum. I try to leave some things up to chance because, I'm not a dictator, and I'm on stage with 70, 80 artists. And I like to leave them some room sometimes to be artists and not just tell them there's some, computer or machine, you have to do this, So I like to be able to leave. Maybe the oboist wants to do that solo a little bit more broadly and open, expansively, or maybe they want to do it a little more restrained and confined. And so I kind of like to leave some of that up to chance and see what happens in the rehearsals. And of course, if it's something that goes completely contrary to all of my careful planning about the structure, then I might have a conversation with the musician and be like, hey, why are you playing it like this? I'd like to know more about this. Okay, well, have you thought about doing it this way? Sometimes I change, sometimes they change. It's a very collaborative process. But it all comes down to knowing what's in the score. You have to know what's there before you can start working with it. So after I put that structure in, there's always a point where I go through every single line of the score. And I use those because I don't know, my attention span's not great enough to start at the beginning and go all the way through the piece for every instrument. I use those sort of tent poles that I set up as the formal structure. And I'm going to do, I'll do the first, the A section. I'm going to go through all of the parts and then do flute 1, flute 2, oboe 1, oboe 2. And I go through because specifically just to make sure that I've seen everything that they have to play. Because when you look at the score, sometimes it's easy to miss some, oh my gosh, I didn't notice that the flute has to do a 2-octave jump there and the 16th note, So it's nice to know
So
the
that would
technical
impact the way
requirements.
you were pacing that moment.
Yeah.
You know, if it's, oh, look at this flute part, I'm going to give the flute player an extra 1/10 of a second when I
Yeah,
place that
exactly.
down.
Because sometimes we miss, if you just
Right.
skim through it, you miss those things. So I
Mhm.
have to go through and like literally play on the piano every single line of music to make sure that I haven't missed any articulations or anything that might need some attention or some, understanding or maybe some new creative solution to find. So that's the kind of the final stage. Is just making sure I've gone through and checked all of that.
Uh-huh. Well, it's going to be a really exciting program, I think. I'm really excited to hear this music. I'm excited to see and hear you direct it.
Thank you.
And it's comforting to know all of the work that you've done behind the scenes in order to give me and to give all of our fellow listeners that kind of emotional ride that we can expect on Saturday night.
Well, I'm happy to have done that work because, as I discovered when I
Because
was...
it's what you were doing that sophomore year of college,
Yeah.
roll over on Saturday morning and get
mean,
up to school and do the work.
I can't explain it. There's such a love that I have, a joy that I have I get from orchestral music, and it's just like all I want to do is be able to have as many people experience that same feeling that I feel when I'm on the podium.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk. I'm really looking forward to this concert.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody on Saturday.
See you there.